alaikum, everyone. My name is Sana, and welcome to our third session of Islamophobia, Hate and Discrimination in America. The topic for today is understanding the removal of the Muslim ban and immigration. Our guest is a very well-known person in the community, Jim Hacking. Brother Jim Hacking was a founding member of the St. Louis chapter of the Council on America-Islamic Relations and served as the group's executive director for 2 years. He also has a practice of his own, Hacking Law Practice LLC, and our very own associate executive director, Marwan Hamid.
Thank you very much, Sana. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Jim, and thank you very much for giving us the time. I know that you have a very busy schedule. And for those of you who don't know, I used to work for Brother Jim for the last 5 years, and it was one of the most very useful work experience in my life. So, Brother Jim, today we have a lot of questions if we can cover, but as time permits, we're going to ask a few questions about immigration, and we would like to have your insight about it. And the main issue that we would like to ask about today is the Muslim travel ban repeal that was done by the Biden administration on the first day Biden was sworn into the office. So for that particular repeal, we want to ask, some people in the community asked me that, or maybe talk to me and talk to me about it, and they said, well, since Biden in the office and the repeal was already signed and executed, then there's no worries for them to worry about in the immigration system in the United States, basically. And since the former administration gone, that's everything is resolved. And we would like to have your thoughts about that, if you can.
Sure. So, Assalamu alaikum. It's nice to be here with everybody. When I became Muslim in 1998, the first thing I did was join CARE St. Louis. Back then, we would get alerts from Washington, D.C. by fax. And Kamal Yassin would print out the faxes, and he'd put one up on the board at Masjid Bilal and one at Dar al-Salam. And sometimes he would get up after Sheikh Noor gave the khutbah and read these notices. So I knew early on as a baby lawyer that the civil rights of Muslims were important. And a movie came out. Marwan, I don't know if you ever saw this movie. It's called Under Siege. It's sort of cheesy, but this is before 9/11. This movie came out, and there was some kind of terrorist attack. I remember Bruce Willis was the bad army general, and this bomb went off, and they started rounding up Muslims and putting us in. This movie came out, putting us up in camps, and then it was a really scary movie, and CARE got all worked up about it. I remember, but I think that CARE had intervened like halfway through, and they sort of made the movie a little less anti-Islamic. I think they even. I should watch it again now, all these years later. But I think they even came up with like a good Muslim character, you know. Anyway, and so at first, CARE in St. Louis really didn't do a whole lot. We dealt with sort of public relations stuff. I remember the first thing that we did was the Barnes and Noble over on Ladue Road had the Quran in the religious fiction section, if you can believe that, in the religious fiction section. Yeah.
Wow.
So that was our first, that was we took care of that. I think that was in July of 2001. And then Amani and I went to Egypt and Jordan and Saudi Arabia for Umrah. And that's where she told me that she was pregnant with Ismail. And anyway, we got back on September 4th, 2001. So that's 7 days before 9/11. And we came from Saudi Arabia. So I always say to myself, if we had come back a week later, I'd still be in Saudi Arabia, right? Or I'd be at Guantanamo, right?
Wow.
So so then that summer or that fall, we were very worried that, everything Under Siege was going to come true. Like the founding, I'll never forget it. The founding members of CARE St. Louis were upstairs in my apartment on Dartmouth, Marwan. And it was Amani and I, so 2 lawyers, someone with a lot of media experience, a law student, and 2 doctors. And we really thought that those days were coming, that the Muslims were going to be rounded up and that civil liberties were going to be severely curtailed. And of course, that didn't happen. And as dumb as George Bush was as president, the one thing I will give him credit for is he went to that mosque after 9/11 and was very conciliatory and very fair, I thought, to Muslims. And, he talked about how, those terrorists that, everyone forgets those terrorists from 9/11 were in strip clubs in Miami that weekend before they blew themselves up in the World Trade Center. Anyway.
Yeah.
So we didn't really see the anti-Muslim stuff until President Trump came. And, he obviously made an anti-immigrant sentiment a big part of his campaign. And that's sort of where a lot of his appeal came from. He was able to blow those dog whistles sort of covertly and overtly to, let racists know that there was a new president for them. And, he said Mexicans were rapists, and, he instituted that Muslim travel ban the first weekend of his presidency. And everyone will remember all the chaos at the
airports.
Airports. Yeah. And so they had Stephen Miller and Stephen Bannon basically drafted up that Muslim ban on the back of a cocktail napkin, and they wrote it up in a few days. And they didn't send it to the Department of Justice to see if it was legal or constitutional. They didn't send it to Customs and Border Patrol to let people know how that was going to be implemented. You might recall that there was confusion that opening weekend, that people couldn't tell if it was going to apply for citizens from the Muslim countries, green card holders from the Muslim countries, basically anybody from the Muslim countries, or just, non-immigrants.
It was a complete chaos. Yes, I remember that.
And, that was by design. They wanted that turmoil. They wanted that outrage. They wanted eyeballs on what they were doing. That was all on purpose. That wasn't an accident. Yeah. So that's what the Trump presidency was born out of, right? That was the beginning of a 4-year assault on legal immigration, right? And so these guys love to couch what they do in the name of stopping illegal immigration, but their real goal was to stop immigration to the United States from non-white countries. So I don't want to give a whole big immigration history lesson, but it shouldn't be lost on anybody that in the 1960s, that our immigration laws really changed. Up until that point, there have always been periods of time where there were some immigrant groups we wanted and some we didn't. We had the Chinese Exclusionary Acts in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and but it was really in the 1960s, in the whole civil rights era, that immigration was opened to non-white people. That's frankly why my wife's father was able to come to the United States from Egypt, because of the changes in the laws and because we needed doctors. So, but these guys want to return to 1950s. They want white men to be in charge. They want women to know their place. And they want people from shithole countries to stay out of the United States. And that's the president's language, not mine.
Wow.
So that was just to set the table. And then, Marwan, as you know, for the last 4 years, there's been a daily, and I mean this, a daily assault on immigration, both legal and illegal. So what does that mean? Well, everyone thinks that, and I'm getting to some of the issues in the slides, Marwan, so we might have to jump around a little bit, and we might not even use the slides, but everyone thinks about immigration as a legal issue, but really it's a political issue. And the one thing that everyone needs to keep in mind is that our immigration laws haven't really changed for the last 24 years. So the last major immigration reform was in 1996 when old President Bill Clinton, the Democrat, signed one of the harshest anti-immigrant bills we had in that century, right? And made it much easier to deport people, made it much harder to get out of deportation, and Congress has these caps on legal immigration. So the laws didn't change under President Bush, the laws didn't change under Obama or under Trump, and the laws haven't changed under Biden. The laws are the exact same as they were in 1996 for the most part. And Congress has tried to pass comprehensive immigration reform, CIR, that's the phrase you'll hear, comprehensive immigration reform, which means basically how do we overhaul our immigration system. And they just don't have the stomach for it. They haven't been able to get it passed. And even when they were trying to get the DREAM Act passed to try to stop deportations of young people who came to the United States through no fault of their own, they couldn't get that passed. So with a Congress that's so divided and not doing anything about immigration, all that we're left with is presidential interpretation of the law. And so when the comprehensive immigration bill failed in 2010, President Obama said, enough of this. And, you know, he used a lot of his political capital on the ACA as opposed to immigration reform. But he said, I'm going to do what I can on my own. And that's where DACA came from, that he said, you know, the Department of Homeland Security has limited resources. We can only deport so many people. So we're going to place a priority. We're going to make our number one priority criminals, and like violent criminals, to people that keep breaking our immigration laws. And we're going to have a low level of deportation enforcement against like people who are following all the other rules. And we're just not going to deport that many people. And with DACA, we're going to let these undocumented kids come out of the shadows to get a work card and to stop their deportation. So the pendulum swung way to one side. President Obama tried to make it as pro-immigrant as he could under the 1996 laws. President Trump came in and did the opposite. He said, how do I make it harder for immigrants? And they literally made more changes in a month than we would see in 6 months or a year under President Obama. And there's all these little people that you never heard of their names, but from the far right fringes of the anti-immigrant movement, that's who Trump put in charge of immigration and in charge of ICE. Now, these clowns couldn't even get confirmed by the Congress, by the Senate, because they're so loathsome and so anti-immigrant and hateful that Trump had to do all these recess appointments and temporary appointments. And Marwan, you'll remember when we were suing those guys, they were always changing who they were because no one was legally appointed. And so we really had these evil clowns running immigration for the last 4 years. And so Biden has been left with a big old mess. And the system from top to bottom is set up for denial. And that's denial at the embassies, denial at USCIS, denial at the asylum office, denial at the immigration court. At all those places, they were measured on how quickly they denied and how often they denied. And the budgets of the State Department and the budgets of immigration, USCIS, have been raided to pay for that stupid wall and for all that other stuff that Trump wanted to do to screw immigrants. So the State Department, Marwan, you know, as a former diplomat, the State Department is crucial to our relations with countries around the world. They've been gutted. They've been gutted. There's nobody left. The only people that left were the true believers or the people that thought they could make a difference under the Trump administration, but it's totally wrecked. I saw a statistic the other day that there are 190,000 backlogged immigrant visas around the world. And it might be more than that. but I know it's at least 190,000. So it took those really evil clowns about a year or a year and a half to get their influence into USCIS and into the State Department. But that's nailed down now. Those people are built completely now for denial. How do we figure out how to screw these people? It's not a weighing of the evidence. It's not a fair shake. It's how do we figure out a way, whether it's a real way or a fake way, to deny people? How do we do that? And that's what we're dealing with. So the idea that everything's hunky-dory, that everything's fine because Biden's in charge, is a foolish way to think about it. I think it'll take at least 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years, for the Biden people to bring their influence to bear. We have a head of Department of Homeland Security, and he's an immigrant. He's the first immigrant to head Homeland Security. His name's Alejandro Mayorkas. Marwan will remember his name because we sued him many times. He's now in charge of Homeland Security, but there, as far as I know, unless it happened yesterday, and it might have because he was at the White House, but we don't have a head of USCIS now. We have acting director of USCIS from these people left over from Trump. So it's going to take a long time for things to get back to normal at USCIS. And it is true that the two main bans that Trump put in place were the Muslim ban, which you'll recall, they couldn't do it right. It got struck down twice by the Supreme Court, or it got struck down many times by courts around the country. It wasn't until the third version where they put in some fake due process where it was like you could appeal it if your case was denied, but that was all BS because those waivers were never granted. So the Muslim ban banned immigration to the United States from people from these 7 predominantly Muslim countries. And that went to the Supreme Court, and they said that was within the president's power. And so that lasted until January 20th, 2021, as you said, Marwan, when Biden came into office. The other big ban that affects people that are watching this are the 2 bans that he put into place in 2020, which kept the State Department from issuing immigrant visas to many categories of people who the law says they are entitled to get a visa. So the parents of U.S. citizens, the spouses of green card holders, the children of green card holders, employment-based green card applications, and many other visa types. So that President Biden just revoked those parts, and the diversity visa, revoked those parts of the proclamations just last week. So it's going to be a long time before people are seeing things return to normal. And if the point of your question, Marwan, was people think that everything's back to normal and they can do what they want, or that they should go ahead and file stuff that they wouldn't file if Trump were still president, that's a fool's idea, because that's just setting yourself up for denial. And, you know, sometimes getting your case denied isn't the worst thing that can happen. Sometimes your case can get denied and you get placed into deportation. So as far as I can tell right now, things feel almost exactly the same, other than the fact that those bans aren't in place, but we haven't even seen those sort of work their way through the system, much less the new cases coming through. That was a really long answer.
That was a great answer.
Oh.
And that led me to my follow-up question was, what, like, for people who are in the process right now, who have their loved one still waiting overseas to get a visa, what to expect from the repeal of the Muslim travel ban?
Well, the greatest thing that ever happened to Trump's evil plan to stop legal immigration in the United States was COVID, because these embassies were able to be closed even if conditions on the ground were not that bad as relates to COVID. In other words, they could use COVID as a reason for not doing their jobs. So getting the bans lifted is part one. The next thing is getting everybody vaccinated and getting the embassies up and running. Now, we have to distinguish between the embassies in towns or places where there's a true COVID problem like South Africa or Brazil versus ones where they're just saying there's a pretext. So when I talk to my clients or my potential clients who are talking about when can I get my loved one here? They've been subject to this ban. When are things going to return to normal or open back up? I say, well, what's the situation in your country as it relates to COVID? Because I just don't know on a country by country basis what's going on. So COVID is still being used as a pretext. Now, I think with our new Secretary of State, that they're going to stop using that as a pretext, and I will start to believe them when they say that it's COVID related versus not. But even in our lawsuits, COVID has thrown us a real curveball in some places because they're just not working on things. And then Marwan, the other thing is with Baghdad and Erbil especially, nothing's happening in Iraq. And I think that's partly COVID, but I think it's mostly due to security stuff. So I think we just filed our last Iraq lawsuit for a while because just nothing's happening.
Yeah, and there's also, I heard in the news something about a fraud that's been happening about Iraqi or something regarding the Iraqi refugee program or a resettlement program that also was stopped by the Biden administration. And that's another part. Probably you heard a lot of question about it. I'm not sure from my experience with you. I don't think you're working on that part, which is the refugee part. That for people who are overseas and apply for a refugee status to come to the United States, do you have any like general information about that? If they're gonna I know it was stopped during the Trump administration, but then would there be any change to it during the Biden administration, or do you know any information about that?
Yeah, so the fiscal year starts every October 1st. So we're basically halfway through the fiscal year, right? And so Trump, the normal number of refugees, I think the maximum number of refugees that we can take is 115,000. And Trump had it down to, I think, around 7,000 or 8,000.
Wow.
So for the last few years, we've had very, very few refugees coming. And my understanding is that Biden has ramped it up as much as he can for the time period between now and September 30th at the end of the fiscal year. So I think that they're going to end up bringing in around 45,000 refugees. I haven't heard what you were talking about the fraud in the refugee system, but my understanding is that Biden's going to turn refugee back on to full juice October 1st. And so that's obviously a good thing.
Got it. All right. And so, okay, so one of the community member asked about the executive order itself. Is that going to stay if Biden left the office, or is it just a temporary solution?
Well, you know, so this is a good question. So we need to think about the hierarchy of laws in the United States. So anyone who ever studied for the citizenship exam knows that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. So first we have the Constitution. So if the Constitution is in conflict with a statute or anything underneath it, the Constitution wins. Underneath the Constitution is legislation. So laws actually passed by Congress and signed by the president. Then after that, under that, we have regulations. So each agency, like immigration, can pass regulations. They have to publish a proposed rule, and then they have to let everybody comment on the rule. So let's say, just for the sake of argument, let's say that Homeland Security or USCIS decided we don't want to let anyone from Iraq into the United States, or we could pass a constitutional amendment, which would be very hard. You got to get like 2/3 of the states to ratify it. That would be very hard. You'd have a hard time getting Congress to pass that law, right? Because that's unfair and they're not going to do that. And then you could have the USCIS say, in our interpretation of the Immigration and Nationality Act, we don't think that it's in the United States' best interest to allow people from Iraq to come to the United States. That would be regulation. So they'd have to publish that rule, and then everybody could comment on it. And so CARE would write a letter, I could write a letter saying, this rule is unfair, you should not do this. And so regulations aren't as strong as statutes, but they are stronger than the last category. And the last category are presidential proclamations and executive orders. So those are the weakest forms of governance. So that was, everybody hated Trump and nobody wanted to pass any of his stupid stuff, and he didn't know how to get bills passed through Congress. So that's why you saw him do so much with executive orders. So Congress could have done away with the Muslim ban by passing a law that said the Muslim ban was illegal. They just never did it because it wasn't going to get through the Senate because Republicans controlled the Senate. So in answer to the viewer's question, they can, if a Donald Trump Jr. became president, or if Donald Trump became president again, he could put in another executive order and that would be in place until we get another president. That's the real problem with not getting comprehensive immigration reform, is that the laws are written in a way that let the presidents do these stupid things when they feel like it. I mean, nobody anticipated a president like Donald Trump, except for me. As you'll recall, I predicted that he would beat Hillary Clinton. I knew that white people were going to vote for him in secret, which they did.
That's true. And now that led me to the other question. What about the immigration bill that was presented to the Congress by the Biden administration? Is that something helpful? Do you have like information about that? And is it good for us, or is it bad?
Yeah, I haven't looked it over, but you know, there are between 12 and 15 million people in the United States who are undocumented. And we don't use the phrase at our office, illegal immigrant. We don't believe anyone's illegal. If you kill someone and you're sitting on death row, nobody calls you illegal. So we don't use that phrase. The phrase that we use is undocumented, i.e. they don't have proper documentation. And there's two categories of people in the United States who are undocumented. One group of people are those people who entered the United States with inspection. That there's a huge concept in immigration law. Were you inspected when you entered the United States? So Marwan, when you came to the United States on your student visa, you were inspected. When I came back from Costa Rica, I was inspected. So in the immigration context, there's a huge difference between people who are inspected and not inspected. So about a third of the millions of people who are in the United States without proper documentation are visa overstays. And Marwan, you know, we used to hear from those people. We hear from those people all the time.
That's true.
The other 2/3 are people who are what are called EWIs, entered without inspection. They entered the United States without inspection. They came across the border, they swam across the river, whatever way they got into the United States, but they weren't properly inspected by a US government official. So this bill, my understanding of the bill, and Marwan, like I said, it's really long and I haven't studied it yet just because we've been so busy. And I'm waiting to see if it actually gets traction. But this bill would provide a long path. I think it's an 8-year path for people who are in the United States, who haven't committed crimes, who haven't come and gone a lot, to get into a line to get lawful status and a path to citizenship. And that's one of the big myths in immigration that you hear all the time, is people will say, well, why don't these damn immigrants just get in line? And the reason for that is, for the most part, there's no line. You know, Marwan, we had people all the time contact us at the office and they'd be like, boy, I really like it in America. I really want to stay. How do I stay? And really there's four ways that people can get status in the United States. One is through family relation, usually by marrying a US citizen. Now, if you enter without inspection, even that's pretty hard. Or if you have a child in the United States, but that child has to be 21. So another big myth is this myth of anchor babies, that just because you have a US citizen child, you're on a path to citizenship. You're not, because they can't do anything for you till they're 21. So family is one way, employment's another. So if you work in a specialty occupation, so if you work in a job that requires a specialized degree, like let's say electrical engineer or airplane pilot or things like that, you can get an employment-based green card, or you can get a work visa and then an employment-based green card. That can take a really long time and there are big backlogs there. Then the diversity visa, which allows people who are from historically underrepresented countries to apply for this lottery. So every year, 1 million people apply for 50,000 green cards. Now, You can't apply for that if you're from like Mexico or the Philippines or India or Pakistan, but you can if you're like from, I don't know, Morocco or South Africa or Luxembourg, anywhere where there's not a lot of those people in the United States, you can apply for this diversity visa. Then the last one is if you come as a refugee or if you get asylum in the United States. So that's it. Those are the lines. There are no other lines. There's no, oh boy, I really like it here, or oh, you know, I mean, there's one other way you can, if you have like $1 million, you can start a business and basically buy a green card, but those are really hard to come by. So the four main things for most people are the ones that I mentioned: family, employment, asylum, and diversity visa. So that bill that the Biden administration is trying to at least say that they want to push through immigration is that would give a path to those people. So it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see what the strategy is. Do they want to try one big bill that covers all this immigration stuff? Or do they want to break it up and say, like, work on the DREAM Act kids first, get them squared away, and then go on to bigger issues? But none of it's going to pass as long as that filibuster is still in place, because they don't have 60 votes in the Senate to pass this legislation. So it would have to be 50 votes by the Democrats plus Kamala Harris breaking the tie. That's the only way they're going to get meaningful immigration reform, is if they do away with the filibuster.
That'll be interesting to know. So while we're speaking about expected versus non-expected and undocumented people in the United States, a question came to my mind about a group that I was part of. That group is the asylum seekers. What they will be considered under that bill if it discussed or passed?
Well, so
yeah,
that's a great question, because we've been hearing from a lot of immigrants who are like, damn that Biden, he's focused on all the people who are here out of status, not on the people who tried to do it, quote unquote, the right way. So let me talk about asylum. I think that in order to talk about asylum, it's important to remember what asylum is. Asylum is for people who are physically present in the United States, physically present in the United States. That's why Trump wouldn't let all those asylum seekers from Central America come across the border and stop them at the port of entry, and got Mexico to agree to house them and prevent them from getting to a port of entry so they could make claims for asylum. Asylum is for people who fear persecution back in their home country. And it has to be what's called a credible fear, a believable fear, a fear that the officer who's interviewing you believes to be real. And it has to be a fear of persecution, not that things are bad in my home country and I won't be able to find a job. Persecution is, I'm going to be tortured, I'm going to be killed, I'm going to have my head chopped off if I go back because of something about myself that I can't change or shouldn't have to change. So the five main categories of protection are race, religion, nationality, political opinion, and then the last one is this thing called membership in a particular social group. So the law recognizes that those four don't cover everything. So they have one extra one, which is sort of like a catch-all. If you can define the group and show that that group faces persecution back in your home country, then you might be able to get asylum. Now, right in the middle of Obama's second term, he and his Department of Homeland Security declared, for example, Guatemalan women who are abused by their husbands, who can't be protected by the police in Guatemala. That's a particular social group. So that's sort of the kind of thing that I'm talking about. You might have transgender people who don't want to go back to Saudi Arabia or whatever. There's lots of people that fall into that group. Well, under Trump and Jeff Sessions, who was that little racist, I'll fix it, that's me, that little racist, I just gotta change my camera, Attorney General that we had, he really made it harder for particular social groups to make their claims. And I mentioned how harsh the Trump administration was against immigration, but nobody got it harder than asylum seekers. So back about 5 years ago, the asylum office approval rate was about 48%. Now it's about 20%. And the immigration courts, their denial rates are up to like 85% right now. And so there's no type of immigration that's been under more attack than asylum. So that's going to take a really long time to get back to normal. The asylum machine became a deportation machine. These immigration judges were told to deport as many people as possible. And we really saw a spike in the number of these denials. So asylum seekers who are in the United States and who would qualify for what Biden is offering, I think that they'll be able, if the laws are passed, I think they'll be able to take advantage of that. I don't think having filed for asylum, they'll be punished for that. And I do think that the grace or the forgiveness that's going to be part of this amnesty bill would apply, because what they're saying is, were you physically in the United States? I think it's by November 1st, 2020.
Okay. So that could be for asylum seekers as well.
It could be helpful. Yeah.
Could be helpful for them. Okay, so my other question here is about immediate relatives of either a green card holder or a citizen, U.S. citizen.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between them and the priority, like who's more important than the other, or
yeah, who has greater priority?
Or yeah, who gets the priority for that?
So Congress has said that we don't want to limit the spouses of U.S. citizens, the under 21-year-old children of U.S. citizens, and the parents of U.S. citizens from coming to the United States. We want to unify families. And that's sort of one of those big sea changes that happened in the 60s, was that they want family reunification in the United States. And this is something that makes the anti-immigrant people really mad. But anyway, Congress has said there's no cap on those for people. Okay, so you don't have to wait in a line if you're married to a green card, if you're married to a U.S. citizen, or if you're the child of a U.S. citizen. You just have to go through the regular processing of it, and if it's approved, there's an immediate visa available. For everybody else, Congress has placed a cap on that, right? So there are a certain number of visas set aside every year, and they're divided up into categories. So we have, for instance, the adult children of U.S. citizens, the adult children of green card holders, the underage children of green card holders, the spouses of green card holders, the siblings of U.S. citizens. So they're all in these different categories, and there's a cap for each category. And whenever you have a cap, you have a backlog. So the difference between a U.S. citizen sponsoring someone and a green card holder sponsoring someone is that usually there's a backlog on the spouses of green card holders. At this particular time, for the last year and a half, for the first time in my career as an immigration lawyer, the numbers are current for the spouses of green card holders. So in theory, a green card spouse case and a citizen spouse case should go at the same speed. They don't, because USCIS handles those a little bit more slowly. And that's one thing. The other thing is that if you're out of status and you're married to a U.S. citizen, that being out of status can be forgiven when you get your green card. But if you're married to a green card holder, that most likely will not be forgiven, and that might keep you from being able to get your green card.
Thank you very much for the answer, Jim. Senna, do you?
There was a question sent on Facebook.
Okay.
Can people come back to the U.S. legally if they have been deported?
They can. I mean, typically you have a 10-year bar on coming back. It depends on the circumstances of your deportation. Some people are prohibited from ever coming back. It depends why you were deported. It depends what the judge held. It depends. So typically if someone contacts us and says, hey, I got deported, I want to come back, we have two main questions. Number one is, let's go ahead and request your file from the Immigration Service so that we know what we're dealing with. And two, the thing that people forget is they need a new way to come to the United States. It's as if, at the very least, it's as if they were never here. So let's just do this example, because this is something that happens from time to time. Yeah, a brother files for his sister and they wait 12 or 13 years. That's how long it takes. And then the sister comes to the United States and she gets her green card. She stays for 2 years and then she says, I'm going to go back home for a couple of years. and she basically abandons her residency in the United States. And let's say she wasn't even deported, but then she's outside the United States for like 5 years. Her green card is gone because she's abandoned her residency. And now she wants to come back. She could try to come on that expired green card, but that's not going to work. They're going to turn her around. And so then her option is, well, I could start all over with my brother, but he died. So now I can't. And even then, that's a 13-year wait. So once you have that benefit, it's hard to get it back, whether you're deported or not. So that's why we always yell at people who leave and stay outside the United States for too long, because they're really putting their green cards at risk. And it's really defeating the whole benefit of having the visa and the green card in the first place.
So 10 years is the wait then?
It can be, yeah. It can be permanent. It can be less. Yeah.
That was a great and complex example you just gave us.
Yeah.
But it happened, definitely. I wanted to ask you about, and that I got from the slide you showed me, about the USCIS versus ICE. If people, especially undocumented people, were confronted by law enforcement or people who pretend to be law enforcement, but they're actually from ICE. And can you explain to us what the difference between this and this, and how people should react or should deal with a situation like that?
So that's a good question. So after 9/11, when I was a kid, immigration was called INS, the Immigration Naturalization Service. INS got split into 3 parts. Part 1 was USCIS. They're supposed to be the nice part, the part that gives out immigration benefits. Then you have Immigration Customs Enforcement, and those guys are cowboys. That's why they have a cool name like ICE. And they're the ones that round up people and put them in deportation. And then you have Customs and Border Patrol. Those are the people at the airports or at the borders letting people into the United States or not. So if you're in the United States and you come into contact with ICE, you have to think about, what is my current status and how do I want to handle this? So a lot of times ICE will act like they're real cops. They'll come knocking on your door. They'll act like they have a warrant, and they'll show you a piece of paper that's what's called an administrative warrant. It's not a warrant signed by a judge. If they don't have a warrant signed by a judge, you should not open your door, especially if you're undocumented. No matter if you're documented or undocumented, no matter who comes to your house, you should always say to them, I'd be happy to talk to you, but I want to have a lawyer there. And then you call Marwan, and then he'll call me, and we'll call the FBI, or we'll call ICE, we'll call whoever it is. We'll be happy to talk to you, but we want a lawyer there with us. And even if you have to say it 4 times, you just keep saying that. And we'll come, or I'll send somebody, or I'll come, or whatever. We'll figure out a way to handle this. Now, sometimes if it's the FBI and we say there's a lawyer involved, they'll just go away. They'll just not want it. Oh, it wasn't that important. And they'll say, oh, well, you don't need to get a lawyer. You don't need to spend money on that, or this isn't that big a deal. We just need to clear some things up. It's not about you. So you always have to be very careful dealing with the federal government. And so, but the flip side of it is, if you're applying for an immigration benefit, like sometimes we've had people, Marwan knows, we've had people who have a green card case pending, and the FBI want to talk to them, and they're saying, I'm not talking to the FBI, no way. Well, that's dumb, because if you want to get that benefit, you got to show, or citizenship, you've got to show that you're going to be a good member of society, not a citizen, but a good member of society, that you're going to contribute. Now, that doesn't mean you have to go rat people out or talk to them without a lawyer, but you need to balance, what do I want? I want to get my citizenship with, what questions are they asking me, and what am I willing to do? So I haven't been on those calls for a while, but you need to be careful. And especially if you're undocumented, if someone's at your door, you need to say, do you have a judge's warrant, a judicial warrant? That's really what they can do. Otherwise, that you don't have to let them in. And you should.
Great. Now, speaking of lawyers, I know a lot of people that I communicated with, either at the masjid or somewhere else here in St. Louis, who want to get their immigration benefits without having a lawyer, without hiring an attorney to represent them. in that matter, saying that it is very clear and it's easy to do. We can just go through it, reading the instruction. What is your advice on that?
Okay, so that's a great question, but I'm going to turn that question back on you, Marwan. You worked here for 5 years.
Yeah,
and pretend that I'm not here. If you've seen what they've been up to, and you've seen it before Trump. So you knew how they were before Trump. So this idea that we're getting back to a stage where everything's lollipops and flowers, that USCIS is just going to bend over backwards to give out citizenship and green cards like candy, is ridiculous. But I mean, think of a story, or Marwan, think of something that you've seen in the office that would answer that question. And obviously don't give away any information about people, but you know, you took those calls every day, and you've seen denial notices as many as I have over the last 5 years. So after having worked at an immigration law firm that I believe does a pretty good job, what's your answer to that? And then I'll give my answer.
My answer is basically driven from my personal experience myself. I looked up the immigration system before I hired you, Jim. And I looked into the website, I looked into the instruction, how to do this and how to do that. And the one thing I learned is that the whole country was built by lawyers, basically. That's something I noticed. And I think to get something that was built by lawyers, you need a lawyer to do that, basically, even if you understand. And the language is so tricky on the USCIS website, and the instruction and all the forms over there. So tricky that you think they're asking about something, but they're asking about something else.
So
yeah,
you go ahead, finish up.
No, that's the end of it. That's my experience about it.
So I like the way you said that. Now, I believe that there are some simple immigration benefits that people can do on their own. For instance, we don't do anything related to visit visas to the United States. Most of them are denied. It just get people mad if we got involved. I think you could probably renew your green card on your own. Anything other than that, I think you do need a lawyer, especially these days. You know, Marwan, how many doctors with PhDs or MDs did we help with situations? I remember one doctor who had applied for an I-130 for his mother, and she was going to process overseas. And she came to visit him on a visit while the immigration case was pending. And so she was in the United States, and she overstayed her visa, and he thought everything was going to be okay. So their interview notice came back home in Jordan, and he, being a doctor, thought he knew a lot of things. He kept postponing it because he was a big heavy guy who, you know, couldn't be bothered by going to his mother's immigration interview, which, you know, shocked me. So she ended up staying staying in the United States for like 8 months, longer than she was supposed to. So he finally gets around to going to her interview. He and mom go to the interview, and the officer says, "Well, I believe you're her son, you're her son, and that you're a US citizen, so I can approve the petition, but the problem is she has a 3-year bar because you didn't come back in time." So, I mean, I don't have my book right now, but Marwan knows there's a book called Kurzban that we keep in our office. It has all the immigration rules in it. The font's like this big, right? And so just like I wouldn't go to that doctor or I wouldn't say, I'm going to perform heart surgery on myself. You know, what we do isn't heart surgery, but it's pretty complex. And remember, there's those levels of rules. There's the Constitution, there's statutes, there's regulations, and then there's presidential proclamations. So the idea that you can stay up to date on all this stuff is crazy.
That's true. And I still remember one case for a person who applied for citizenship and got denied for a parking ticket, basically.
Yeah. We have that case on appeal. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I'm still waiting for that one. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the big problem, is that people operate as if USCIS is going to treat them fairly. They operate as if, if it's a balancing act, you know, I only have to show 51% that I am deserving of this benefit. They're not operating from the assumption that immigration is trying to deny them. That's the problem. That's the trap, is that they think they're going to get a fair shake, and they're not going to get a fair shake.
That's true. That's true. I don't know, Sana, if you have more questions there from the viewers.
Oh, not any more questions.
Awesome.
Okay.
Well, this was fun.
It was
That
a
was,
lot of
that was
information.
really great. Yeah.
I actually have one question.
Oh, go for it.
You mentioned back about unifying families. What about those hundreds of kids that were separated from their families? What happens to them?
Speaking of how great lawyers are, I just saw a headline the other day that 500 kids so far have been located. I think they're going to find most of them, even though, you know, and there's a great book out by this guy named Jacob Soboroff. He's the guy from NBC and MSNBC who sort of really broke that story. You know, that was all intentional. That wasn't by mistake. They wanted to do that as a deterrent. They wanted to scare those people coming up from Central America. They wanted them to know that if you come, you're going to be separated from your child maybe forever. So, Sana, in answer to your question, they've gotten more than half of those kids reunited, and I think they'll continue to do that.
That story is just heartbreaking.
But it was on purpose.
Yeah, which makes it even worse.
Terrible. Yeah, and this guy's going to run again in 4 years, and
Oh,
70 million people voted for him.
wow.
70 million people voted for him.
Yeah. That's
The thought of that is scary.
All right. Well, if anyone needs to get a hold of me, 314-961-8200. Marwan, I'd love to share this somehow on my YouTube channel, so maybe we can get the recording and put it up somehow. I'll have to figure that out. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Well, this is good. Anytime you need me, let me know.
Jim, thank you very
so
much.
much.
That was
All right.
very informative. Really appreciate it.
All right.
Thank
Assalamu
you.
alaikum.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.